Howdy, friends. Thank you for stopping by. I'd like to continue on with the Lone Star Ranger. Book 2, The Ranger by Zane Grey. I would truly appreciate if you give me that thumbs up and follow the channel so I can continue on bringing you down the dusty trail with me. Appreciate y'all. Here we go. Saddle up. Dwayne left the hall, elbowed his way through the crowd, and went down the street. He was certain on the faces of some men that he had seen ill-concealed wonder and satisfaction. He had struck some kind of hot trait, and he meant to see wherever it led. It was by no means unlikely that Cheseldine might be at the other end. Dwayne controlled the mounting eagerness, but never and anon it was shot through with the remembrance of Ray Longstreth. He suspected her father of being not what he pretended. He might very, and probably would, bring sorrow and shame to this young woman. The thought made him start with pain. She began to haunt him, and then he was thinking more of her beauty and sweetness than of the disgrace he might bring upon her. Some strange emotion, long locked inside Dwayne's heart, knocked to be heard, to be let out. He was troubled. Upon returning to the inn, he found Laramie there, apparently none the worse for his injury. "How are you, Laramie?" he asked. "Reckon I'm feeling as well as could be expected," replied Laramie. His head was circled by a bandage that did not conceal the lump where he had been struck. He looked pale, but he was bright enough. "That was a good crack Snecker gave you," remarked Dwayne. "I ain't accusing Bo," remonstrated Laramie, with eyes that made Dwayne thoughtful. "Well, I accuse him. I caught him. I took him to Longstreth's court, but they let him go." Laramie appeared to be agitated by this intimation of friendship. "See here, Laramie," went on Dwayne, "in some parts of Texas it's policy to be close-mouthed. Policy and health-preserving. Between ourselves, I want you to know I lean on your side of the fence." Laramie gave a quick start. Presently Dwayne turned frankly and met his gaze. It startled Laramie out of his habitual taciturnity, but even as he looked, the light that might have been amaze and joy faded about his face, leaving it in the same old mask. Still, Dwayne had seen enough. Like a bloodhound, he had a scent. "Talking about work, Laramie, who'd you say Snecker worked for?" "I didn't say." "Well, say you now, can't you? Laramie, you're powerful peevish today. Is that bump on your head? Who does Snecker work for?" "When he works at all." He paused. "Which sure ain't often he rides for Longstreth." "Huh. Seems to me Longstreth's the whole circus round Fairdale. I was some sore the other day to find I was losing good money at Longstreth faro game. Sure, if I'd won, I wouldn't have been sore. But I was surprised to hear one say Longstreth owned that Hope So joint." "He owns considerable property hereabouts," replied Laramie, constrainedly. "Huh. Laramie, like every other feller I meet in this town, you're afraid to open your trap about Longstreth. Get me straight, Laramie, I don't care a damn for Colonel Mayor Longstreth, and 'cause I'd throw a gun on him just as quick as any other rustler in the Pecos." "Talk's cheap," replied Laramie, making light of his bluster, but the red was a little deeper in his face. "Sure, I know that," Dwayne said. "Usually I don't talk. It's not well known that Longstreth owns the Hope So." "Reckon it's known in the Pecos, all right, but Longstreth's name isn't connected with the Hope So. Blandy runs the place." "That Blandy is faro game's crooked, or I'm a locoed bronc." Not that we don't have lots of crooked faro dealers. Fellow can stand for them, but Blandy's mean, backhanded, and never looks you in the eyes. That Hope So place ought to be run by a good fellow like you, Laramie. Thanks, replied he, and Dwayne imagined his voice a little husky. Didn't you hear I used to run it? No. Did you? Dwayne said. I reckon. I built the place, made additions twice, owned it for 11 years. Well, I'll be doggone. It was indeed Dwayne's turn to be surprised, and with the surprise came a glimmering. I'm sorry you're not there now. Did you sell out? No, I just lost the place. Laramie was bursting for relief now to talk, to tell. Sympathy had made him soft. It was 2 years ago, 2 years last March, he went on. I was in a big cattle deal with Longstreth. We got the stock, and my share, 1,800 head, was rustled off. I owed Longstreth. He pressed me. It came to a lawsuit, and I was ruined. It hurt Dwayne to look at Laramie. He was white, and tears rolled down his cheeks. Dwayne saw the bitterness, the defeat, the agony of the man. He had failed to meet his obligations. Nevertheless, he had been swindled. All that he suppressed, all that he would have been, passion had the man's spirit not been broken, lay bare for Dwayne to see. He had now the secret of his bitterness, but the reason he did not openly accuse Longstreth, the secret of his resistance and fear. These Dwayne thought best to try to learn at some later time. Hard luck certainly was tough, Dwayne said, but you're a good loser, and the wheel turns. Now, Laramie, here's what I need your advice. I've got a little money, but before I lose it, I want to invest some, buy some stock, or buy an interest in some rancher's herd. What I want you to steer me on is a good square rancher, or maybe a couple of ranchers, if there happen to be two honest ones. No deals with ranchers who ride in the dark with rustlers. I have a hunch Fairdale's full of them. Now, Laramie, you've been here for years. Sure, you must know a couple of men above suspicion. Thank God I do, he replied feelingly. Frank Morton and Cy Zimmer, my friends and neighbors all my prosperous days, and friends still. You can gamble on Frank and Cy, but if you want advice from me, don't invest money in stock right now. Why? Because any new feller buying stock these days will be rustled quicker than he can say Jack Robinson. The pioneers, the new cattlemen, these are easy pickings for rustlers. Lord knows all the ranchers are easy enough picking, but the new fellers have to learn the ropes. They don't know anything or anybody. And the old ranchers are wise and sore. They'd fight if they had, well, what? Dwayne put in as he paused. If they knew it was rustling their stock? No. If they had nerve. Not that so much. What then? What'd make 'em fight? A leader. Howdy there, Jim, boomed his big voice. A man of great bulk with a ruddy merry face entered the room. Hello, Morton, replied Laramie. I'd introduce you to my guest here, but I don't know his name. Ha! That's all right. Few men out here go by their right names. Say, Morton, put in Dwayne. Laramie gave me a hunch you'd be a good man to tie to. Now, I've little money, and before I lose it, I'd like to invest in some stock. Morton smiled broadly. I'm on the square, Dwayne said bluntly. If you fellers never size up your neighbors any better than you sized me, well, you won't get any richer. It was enjoyment for Dwayne to make his remarks to these men pregnant with the meaning. Morton showed his pleasure, his interest, but his faith held aloof. I've got some money. Will you let me in on some kind of deal? Will you start me up as a stockman with a little herd of my own? Well, stranger, to come out flat-footed, you'd be foolish to buy cattle now. I don't want to take your money and see you lose out. Better go back across the Pecos where the rustlers ain't so strong. I haven't had more'n 2,500 herd of stock for 10 years. The rustlers let me hang on to a breeding herd. Kind of them, ain't it? Sorta, kind. All I hear is rustlers, Morton, replied Dwayne with impatience. You see, I haven't ever lived long in rustler-run country. Who heads the gang, anyway? Morton looked at Dwayne with a curiously amused smile and then snapped his big jaw as if to shut it for impulsive words. Look here, Morton. Stands to reason no matter how strong these rustlers are, how hidden their work, however involved with supposedly honest men, they can't last. They come with pioneers, and they'll last till there's a single steer left, he declared. Well, if you take that view of circumstances, I just figured you're one of them rustlers. Morton looked as if he were about to brain Dwayne with the butt of his whip. His anger flashed by them, evidently as unworthy of him, and something striking him as funny, he boomed out a laugh. It's not so funny, Dwayne went on. If you're going to pretend a yellow streak, what else will I think? Pretend, he repeated. Sure, I know men of nerve, and here they're not any different from those in other places. I say if you show anything like a lack of sand, it's all bluff. By nature, you've got nerve. There are a lot of men around Fairdale who are afraid of their own shadows, afraid to be out after dark, afraid to open their mouths. But you're not one. So, I say if you claim these rustlers will last, you're pretending lack of nerve just to help the popular idea along. For they can't last. What you need out here is some new blood. Savvy what I mean? Well, I reckon I do, he replied, looking as if a storm had blown over him. Stranger, I'll look you up the next time I'm in town. Then he went out. Laramie's eyes had a flint of striking fire. He breathed deep and looked around the room before his gaze fixed again on Dwayne. Well, he replied, speaking low, you've picked the right men. Now, who in the hell are you? Reaching into the side pocket of his buckskin vest, Dwayne turned the lining out. A star-shaped, bright silver object flashed as he shoved it, pocket and all, under Jim's hard eyes. Ranger, he whispered, cracking the table with his fist. You sure rung true to me. Laramie, do you know who's boss of this secret gang of rustlers hereabouts? Asked Dwayne bluntly. It's characteristic of him to come sharp to the point. His voice, something deep, easy, and cool about him, seemed to steady Laramie. No, replied Laramie. Does anybody know? Went on Dwayne. Well, I reckon there's not one honest native who knows. But you have your suspicions. We have. Give me your idea about this crowd that hangs around the saloons, the regulars. Just a bad lot, replied Laramie with a quick assurance of knowledge. Most of them have been here for years. Others just drifted in. Some of them work, odd times. They rustle a few steers, steal, rob, anything for a little money to drink and gamble. Just a bad lot. Have you any idea whether Cheseldine and his gang are associated with the gang here? Lord knows. I've always suspected them the same gang. None of us ever seen Cheseldine, and that's strange. When Nell Poggin, Panhandle Smith, Blossom Kane, and Fletcher, they all ride in here often. No, Poggin doesn't come often. But the others do. For that matter, they're all around, all over the west of Pecos. Now I'm puzzled over this, said Dwayne. Why do men, apparently honest men, seem to be so closed-mouthed around here? Is that a fact or only my impression? It's sure fact, replied Laramie darkly. Men have lost cattle and property in Fairdale, lost them honestly or otherwise. And in some cases, when they talked, hinted a little bit, they was found dead. Apparently held up and robbed, but dead, and dead men don't talk. That's why we're close-mouthed. Dwayne felt a dark, somber sternness. Rustling cattle was not intolerable. Western Texas has gone on prospering, growing in spite of the hordes of rustlers ranging its vast stretches. But a cold secret, murderous hold on a little struggling community was something too strange, too terrible for men to stand long. The ranger was about to speak again when a clatter of hooves interrupted him. Horses halted in the front, and one rider got down. Floyd Lawson entered. He called for tobacco. If his visit surprised Laramie, he did not show any evidence. But Lawson showed rage as he saw the ranger, and then a dark glint flitted from the eyes that shifted from Duane to Laramie and back again. Duane leaned easily against the counter. "Say, that was a bad break of yours," Lawson said. "If you come fooling around the ranch again, there'll be hell." Seemed strange that a man who lived west of the Pecos for 10 years could not see in Duane something which forbade that kind of talk. It certainly was not nerve that Lawson showed. Men of courage were seldom intolerant. With the matchless nerve that characterized the great gunmen of the day, there was a cool, unobtrusive manner, a speech brief, almost gentle, certainly courteous. Lawson was a hot-headed Louisianan of French extraction, a man evidently who had never been crossed in anything, and who was strong, brutal, passionate, which qualities in the face of a situation like this made him simply a fool. "I'm saying again, you used your ranger bluff just to get near Ray Longstreth," Lawson sneered. "Mind you, you come up there again, there'll be hell." "You're right, but not the kind you think," Duane retorted, his sharp and cold. "Ray Longstreth wouldn't stop to know a dirty blood tracker like you," said Lawson hotly. He did not seem to have a deliberate intention to rouse Duane. The man was simply rancorous, jealous. "I'll call you right, you cheap bluffer, you four-flush, you damned interfering, conceited ranger." "Lawson, I will not take offense because you seem to be championing your beautiful cousin," replied Duane in slow speech. "But let me return your compliment. You're a fine Southerner. Why, you're the only cheap four-flush, damn bull-headed rustler." Duane hissed the last word. Then for him, there was the truth in Lawson's working, passion-blackened face. Lawson jerked, moved, and he meant to draw, but how slow. Duane lunged forward. His long arm swept up, and Lawson staggered backward, knocking over tables and chairs to fall hard in a half-sitting position against the wall. "Don't draw," warned Duane. "Lawson, get away from your gun," yelled Laramie. Lawson was crazed with fury. He tugged at his hip, his face corded with purple welts, malignant, murderous. Duane kicked the gun out of his hand. Lawson got up, raging, and rushed out. Laramie lifted his shaking hands. "What you winging for?" we wailed. "He was drawing on you. Kicking men like him won't do out here." That bull-headed fool roar and butt himself with all his gang right into your hands. He's just the man I needed to meet. Besides, shooting him would have been murder. "Murder?" exclaimed Laramie. "Yeah, for me," replied Duane. "That may be true, whoever you are, but if Lawson's the man you think he is, he'll begin that secret underground business. Why, Lawson won't sleep for nights now. He's a Longstreth have been after me." "Laramie, what are your eyes for?" demanded Duane. "Watch out. And now here, see your friend Morton. Tell him this game grows hot. Together you approach 4 or 5 men you know well and can absolutely trust. I may need your help." Then Duane went out from place to place, corner to corner, bar to bar, watching, listening, recording in his mind the excitement that had preceded him, and speculation that was rife. He thought best to keep out of it. After dark, he stole up to Longstreth's ranch. The evening was warm, the doors were open, and in the twilight, the only lamps that could have been lit in Longstreth's big sitting room at the far end of the house. When a buckboard drove up and Longstreth and Lawson alighted, Duane was well hidden in the bushes, so well screened that he could get but a fleeting glimpse of Longstreth as he went in. But for all Duane could see, he appeared to be a calm, quiet man, and intense beneath the surface, with an air of dignity under insult. Dwayne's chance to observe Lawson was lost. They went into the house without speaking and closed the door. At the other end of the porch, close under a window, was an offset between step and wall, and there in the shadow Dwayne hid. So Dwayne waited there in the darkness with patience born of many hours of hiding. Presently a lamp was lit, and Dwayne heard the swish of skirts. "Something happened, surely, Ruth," he heard Miss Longstreth say anxiously. "Papa just met me in the hall and didn't speak. He seemed pale, worried." "Cousin Floyd looked like a thundercloud," said Ruth. "For once he didn't try and kiss me. Something's happened. Well, Ray, this has been a bad day." "Oh, dear, Ruth, what can we do? These are wild men. Floyd makes life miserable for me, and he teases you on her." "I don't call it teasing. Floyd wants to spoon," declared Ruth emphatically. "He'd run after any woman." "Fine compliment to me," Cousin Ruth laughed. "I don't care," replied Ruth stubbornly. "It's so. He's mushy, and when he's been drinking, he tries to kiss me. I hate him." There were steps on the hall floor. "Hello, girls," sounded out Lawson's voice, minus its usual gaiety. "Floyd, what's the matter?" asked Ray presently. "I never saw Papa as he is tonight, nor you, so worried." "Tell me, what's happened?" "Well, Ray, we had a jar today," replied Lawson with a blunt, expressive laugh. "A jar?" echoed both girls cautiously. "We had to submit to a damnable outrage," added Lawson passionately, as if the sound of his voice augmented his feelings. "Listen, girls, I'll tell you all about it." He coughed and cleared his throat in a way that betrayed he'd been drinking. Dwayne sunk deeper into the shadow of his covert, and stiffening his muscles for a protected spell of rigidity, prepared to listen with all acuteness and intensity. Just one word from this Lawson, inadvertently uttered in a moment of passion, might be the word Dwayne needed for his clue. "It happened at the town hall," began Lawson rapidly. "Your father and Judge Owens and I were there in consultation with 3 ranchers from out of town. Then that damn ranger stalked in, dragging Snecker, the fellow who hid here in the house. He had arrested Snecker for alleged assault on a restaurant keeper named Laramie. Snecker been obviously innocent. He was discharged. Then this ranger began shouting his insults. The law was a farce in Fairdale. The court was a farce. There was no law. Your father's office as mayor should be impeached. He made arrests only for petty offenses. He was afraid of the rustlers and the highwaymen and the murderers. He was afraid or just let them alone. He used his office to cheat ranchers and cattlemen in lawsuits. All this ranger yelled for everyone to hear. A damnable outrage. Your father, Ray, insulted in his own court by a rowdy ranger." "Oh," cried Ray Longstreth in mingled distress and anger. "The Ranger Service wants to rule western Texas," went on Lawson. "These rangers are all a low set, many of them worse than outlaws they hunt. Some of them were outlaws and gunfighters before they became rangers. This is one of the worst of the lot. He's keen, intelligent, smooth, and that makes him more to be feared. For he is to be feared. He wanted to kill. He would kill. If your father had made the least move, he would have shot him. He's a cold-nerved devil, a born gunman. My God, any instant I expect to see your father fall dead at my feet." "Oh, Floyd, that unspeakable ruffian!" cried Ray Longstreth passionately. "You see, Ray, this fellow, like all rangers, seeks notoriety. He made that play with Snecker for just a chance to rant against your father. He tried to inflame all Fairdale against him. That about the lawsuits was the worst. Damn him, he'll make us enemies." "What do you care for his insinuations of such a man?" said Ray Longstreth, her voice now deep and rich with feeling. "After a moment's thought, no one will be influenced by them. Do not worry, Floyd. Tell Papa not to worry. Surely, after all these years, he can't be injured in reputation by an adventurer." "Yes, he can be injured," replied Floyd quickly. "A The frontier's a queer place. There are many bitter men here, men who have failed at ranching, and your father has been wonderfully successful. The ranger has dropped poison, and it'll spread. Strangers rode into Fairdale and other hard-looking new customers, and, well, they were new to Duane, if not Fairdale, and it helped to create a charged and waiting atmosphere. The saloons did unusually good business, and they were never closed. Respectable citizens of the town were awakened in the early dawn by rowdies carousing the streets. Duane kept pretty close under cover during the day. He did not entertain the opinion that the first time he walked down the street he could be the target for guns. Things seldom happened that way, and when they did happen so, it was more accident than by design. But at night he was not idle. He met Laramie, Morton, Zimmer, and others of like character in a secret club they had formed, and all the members were ready for action. Duane spent hours at night watching the house where Floyd Lawson stayed when he was not up at the Longstress. At night he was visited, or at least the house was, by strange men who were swift and stealthy and mysterious. All that kindly disposed of friends and neighbors that would not have been. Duane had not been able to recognize any of these night visitors, and he didn't think the time was ripe for a bold holding up of one of them. Nevertheless, he was sure an event would discover Lawson or someone in that house to be in touch with crooked men. Laramie was right. Not 24 hours after his last talk with Duane, in which he advised a quick action, he was found behind the little bar of his restaurant with a bullet hole in his chest, dead. No one could be found that heard the shot, and it had been a deliberate murder, for upon the bar had been left a piece of paper with rudely scrawled with a pencil said, "All friends of Rangers look for the same." This roused Duane. His first move, however, was to bury Laramie. None of Laramie's neighbors evinced any interest in the dead man or the unfortunate family he had left. Duane saw that these neighbors were held back by fear. Mrs. Laramie was ill. The shock of her husband's death was hard on her, and she had been almost left destitute with 5 children. Duane rented a small adobe house on the outskirts of town and moved the family into it, and he played the part of provider and nurse and a friend. After several days, Duane went boldly into town and showed that he meant business. It was his opinion that there were men in Fairdale secretly glad of the Ranger's presence. What he intended to do was food for great speculation. A company of militia could not have had the effect upon the wild element of Fairdale that Duane's presence had. It got out that he was a gunman, lightning swift on the draw, and it was death to face him. He'd killed 30 men, wildest rumor of all. It was actually said of him he had the gun skill of Buck Duane or of Poggin. At first, there had not only been great conjecture among the vicious element, but also very decided checking of all kinds of action calculated to be conspicuous to a keen-eyed ranger. At the tables, at the bars, at the lounging places, Duane heard remarks. "Who's that ranger after? What'll he do first off? Is he waiting for somebody? Who's going to draw on him first and go to hell? Just about how soon will he found somewheres full of lead?" When it came out somewhere that Duane was openly cultivating the honest stay-at-home citizens to array in time against the other element, then Fairdale showed its wolf teeth. Several times Duane was shot at in the dark and once slightly injured. Rumor had it that Poggin, the gunman, was coming to meet him, but the lawless element did not rise up in a mass to slay Duane on sight. It was not so much that the enemies of the law awaited his next move, but just a slowness peculiar to the frontier. The ranger was in their midst. He was interesting, if formidable. He would have been welcomed at the card tables, at the bars, to play and drink with men who knew they were under suspicion. There was a rude kind of good humor, even in their open hostility. Besides, one ranger or company of rangers could not have held the undivided attention of these men from their games, their drinks, their quarrels, except by some decided move. Excitement, greed, appetite were rife in them. Dwayne marked, however, a striking exception to the usual run of strangers he had been in the habit of seeing. Snecker had gone or was under cover. Again, Dwayne caught a vague rumor of the coming of Poggin, yet he never seemed to arrive. Moreover, the goings-on meant the habitues of the resorts and the cowboys who came in to drink and gamble were unusually mild in comparison with their former conduct. This lull, however, did not deceive Dwayne. It could not last. The wonder was that it had lasted this long. Dwayne went often to see Miss Laramie and the children. One afternoon, while he was there, he saw Miss Longstreth and Ruth ride up to the door. They carried a basket. Evidently they have heard of Miss Laramie's trouble, and Dwayne felt strangely glad, but he went into a adjoining room rather than meet him. "Mrs. Laramie, I've come to see you," said Miss Longstreth cheerfully. The little room was not very light, there being only one window in the doors, but Dwayne could see plainly enough. Mrs. Laramie lay a hollow-cheeked and haggard on the bed. Once she had evidently been a woman of some comeliness. The ravages of trouble and grief were there to read in her worn face. It had not, however, been the hard and bitter lines that are characterized by her husband's. Dwayne wondered, considering that Longstreth had ruined Laramie, how Mrs. Laramie was going to regard the daughter of the enemy. "So, you're Granger Longstreth's girl?" queried the woman, with her bright black eyes fixed on her visitor. "Yes," replied Miss Longstreth simply. "This is my cousin, Ruth Herbert. We've come to nurse you, take care of the children, help you in any way you'll let us." There was a long silence. "Well, you look a little like Longstreth," finally said Miss Laramie, "but you're not at all like him. You must take after your mother." "Miss Longstreth, I don't know if I ought to accept anything from you. Your father ruined my husband." "Yes, I know," replied the girl sadly. "That's all the more reason you should let me help. Pray don't refuse. It will mean so much to me." If this poor, stricken woman had any resentment, it speedily melted in the warmth of the sweetness by Miss Longstreth's manner. Dwayne's idea was that the impression of Ray Longstreth's beauty was always swiftly succeeded by that of her generosity and nobility. At any rate, she had started well with Miss Laramie, and no sooner had she begun to talk to the children than both they and the mother were won. The opening of that big basket was an event. Poor, starved little beggar. Dwayne's feelings seemed easily roused. Hard indeed would it have gone with Jim Laramie's slayer if he could have laid eyes on him then. However, Miss Longstreth and Ruth, after the nature of tender and practical girls, did not appear to take the sad situation to heart. The havoc was wrought in that household. The needs now were cheerfulness, kindliness, and help, action, and these girls furnished with a spirit that did Dwayne good. "Miss Laramie, who dressed this baby?" presently asked Miss Longstreth. Dwayne peeped in to see the dilapidated youngster on her knee. That sight, if any other was needed, completed his full and splendid estimate of Ray Longstreth and wrought strangely upon his heart. "The ranger," replied Miss Laramie. "A ranger?" exclaimed Miss Longstreth. "Yeah, he's taken care of us all since," Miss Laramie choked. "Oh, so you've had no help but this?" replied Miss Longstreth heavily. "No women. Too bad. I'll send someone, Miss Laramie, and I'll come myself." "It'll be good for you," went on the older woman. "You see, Jim had few friends, that is, right in town, and they've all been afraid to help us, afraid to get what poor Jim—" "Oh, that's awful," burst out Miss Longstreth passionately. "A brave lot of friends. Miss Laramie, don't you worry any more. We'll take care of you. Here, Ruth, help me. Whatever is the matter with this baby's dress?" Manifestly, Miss Longstreth had some difficulty in subduing her emotion. "Why, it's on Hyde's side before," declared Ruth. "Guess Mr. Ranger hasn't dressed many babies." "He did the best he could," said Miss Laramie. "Lord only knows what would have become of us." "Then he is something more than a ranger?" queried Miss Longstreth, with a little break in her voice. "He's more than I can tell," replied Miss Laramie. He buried Jim, he paid our debts, he fetched us up and brought us here. He bought food for us, he cooked for us, he fed us, he washed and dressed the baby, he sat with me the first couple nights after Jim's death, and when I thought I'd die myself. He's so kind, so gentle, so patient. He's kept me up just by being near. Sometimes I'd wake from a doze, and seeing him there, I'd know how false were all the tales Jim heard about him and believed at first. Why, he plays with the children just like any good man might. When he has the baby up, I just can't believe he's a bloody gunman, as they say he is. He's good, but he isn't happy. He has such sad eyes. He looks far off sometimes when the children climb around him. They love him. His life is sad. Nobody'd tell me he sees the good in things. Once he said somebody had to be a ranger. Well, I say thank God for a ranger like him. Dwayne did not want to hear more, so he walked into the room. "I was thoughtful of you," Dwayne said. "Womankind are needed here. I could do so little. Mrs. Laramie, you look better already. I'm glad. And here's baby all clean and white. Baby, what a time I had trying to puzzle out the way your clothes went on. Well, Miss Laramie, didn't I tell you friends would come? So will the brighter side." "Yes, I've more faith than I had," replied Miss Laramie, "and Granger Longstreth's daughter has come to see me. There for a while after Jim's death, I thought I'd sink. We have nothing. However could I take care of my little ones? But I'm gaining courage." "Miss Laramie, do not distress yourself any more," said Miss Longstreth. "I shall see you are well cared for, I promise you." "Miss Longstreth, that's fine," exclaimed Dwayne. "It's what I'd expected of you." Must have been sweet praise to her, for the whiteness of her face burned out in a beautiful blush. "And it's good of you, too, Miss Herbert, to come," added Dwayne. "Let me thank you both. I'm glad you have these girls as allies and part of my lonely task here. More than glad for the sake of this good woman and the little ones. But both of you be careful about coming here alone. There's a risk. And now I'll be going. Goodbye, Miss Laramie. I'll drop in again to say night. Goodbye." "Mr. Ranger, wait," called Miss Longstreth as he went out. She was white and wonderful. She stepped out the door close to him. "I've wronged you," she said impulsively. "Miss Longstreth, how can you say that?" he returned. "I believed what my father and Floyd Lawson said about you. Now I see I wronged you." "You make me very glad, but Miss Longstreth, please don't speak of wronging me. I've been a gunman. I'm a ranger, and much said of me is true. My duty is hard on others, sometimes on those who are innocent. Alas, but God knows the duty's hard, too, and hard on me. I did wrong you. If you entered my home again, I would think it an honor. Please don't," Miss Longstreth interrupted Dwayne. "But, sir, my conscience flays me," she went on. There was no other sound like her voice. "Will you take my hand? Will you forgive me?" She gave it royally while the others were pressing at her breast, and Dwayne took the proffered hand, and he didn't know what else to do. Then it seemed to dawn upon him there was more behind this white, sweet, noble intensity of her than just making amends or fancied or a real wrong. Dwayne thought the man did not live on earth that could have resisted her right then. I honor you for your goodness to this unfortunate woman, she said, and now her speech came swiftly. When she was all alone and helpless, you were her friend. That was the deed of a man. But Miss Laramie isn't the only unfortunate woman in the world. I, too, am unfortunate. How I may soon need a friend. Will you be my friend? I'm so alone. I'm terribly worried. I fear, oh, surely I need a friend soon. Real soon. I'm afraid of what you'll find out sooner or later, and I want to help you. Let us save life, if not honor. Must I stand alone? All alone? Will you be in? Her voice faded off. It seemed to Dwayne that she must have discovered what he begun to suspect, that her father and Lawson were not the honest ranchers they pretended to be. Perhaps she knew more. Her appeal to Dwayne shook him deeply. He wanted to help her more than he'd ever wanted to help anything or anyone. And with the meaning of the tumultuous sweetness that stirred inside him, there came the realization of a dangerous situation. I must be true to my duty, he said hoarsely. If you knew me, you'd know I can never ask you to be false to it. Well then, I'll do anything for you. Oh, thank you. I'm ashamed that I believed my cousin, Floyd. He lied. I'm all in the dark, strangely distressed. My father wants me to go back home. Floyd is trying to keep me here. They've quarreled. Oh, I know something dreadful will happen. I know I'll need you will you help me? Yes, replied Dwayne, and his look brought the blood back to her face. After supper, Dwayne stole out for his usual evening spying. The night was dark, without starlight, and a stiff wind rustled the leaves. Dwayne bent his steps toward Longstreth's ranch house. He had so much to think about that he never knew where the time went. This night, when he reached the edge of the shrubbery, he heard Lawson's well-known footsteps and saw Longstreth open the door, flashing a broad bar of light into the darkness. Lawson crossed the threshold and closed the door, and all was dark again outside. Not a ray of light escaped from the window. Little doubt that this talk with Longstreth would be interesting to Dwayne. He tiptoed to the door and listened, but he could only hear a murmur of voices. Besides, that position was too risky. He went round the corner of the house. This side of the big adobe house was of much older construction than the back and larger part. There was a narrow passage between the houses leading from the outside through to the patio. This passage now afforded Dwayne an opportunity, and he decided to avail himself, all in spite of the very great danger. Crawling on very stealthily, he got under the shrubbery to the entrance of the passage. In the blackness, a faint streak of light showed the location of a crack in the wall. He had to slip in sideways. It was a tight squeeze, but he entered without the slightest noise. As he progressed, the passage grew a very little bit wider in that direction, and the fact gave rise to the thought that in case necessary, a hurried exit he would do best by working toward the patio. It seemed a good deal of time was consumed in reaching that vantage point. When he did get there, the crack had marked was a foot over his side back against the other and hold himself up. Once with his eye there, he did not care what risk he ran. Longstreth appeared disturbed. He sat stroking his mustache. His brow was clouded, and Lawson's face seemed darker, more sullen, yet lighted by some indomitable resolve. We'll settle both deals tonight, Lawson was saying. That's what I came for. But suppose I don't choose to talk here, protested Longstreth impatiently. I never before made my house place to... We've waited long enough. This place is good as any. You've lost your nerve since that ranger hit town. First now, we'll give you Ray to me. Floyd, you talk like a spoiled boy. Give Ray to you? Why, she's a woman, and I'm finding out that she's got a mind of her own. I told you I was willing for her to marry you. I tried to persuade her, but Ray hasn't any use for you right now. She liked you at first, but now she don't. So what can I do?" "You can make her marry me," replied Lawson. "Make that girl what she don't want to do? Couldn't be done even if I tried. And I don't believe I'll try. I haven't the highest opinion of you of a prospective son-in-law, Floyd. But if Ray loved you, I'd consent. We'd all go away together before this damn miserable business is out. Then she'd never know. And maybe you might be more like you used to be before the West ruined you. But as matters stand, you fight your own game with her, and I'll tell you now you'll lose." "What'd you want to let her come out here for?" demanded Lawson hotly. "It was a dead mistake. I've lost my head over her. I'll have her die. Don't you think if she was my wife I'd soon pull myself together? Since she came, we've none of this been right. And the gang has put up a holler. No, Longstreth, we got to settle things tonight." "Well, we can settle what Ray's concerned in right now," replied Longstreth, raising. "Come on, we'll ask her, see where you stand." They went out, leaving the door open. Duane dropped down to rest himself and wait. He could have liked to hear Miss Longstreth's answer, but he could guess what it would be. Lawson appeared to be all Duane had thought him, and he believed he was going to find out presently that he was worse. The men seemed to be absent a good while, though that feeling might have been occasioned by Duane's thrilling interest and anxiety. Finally he heard heavy steps, and Lawson came in alone. He was leaden-faced and humiliated. Then something abject in him gave place to rage. He strode the room. He cursed. Then Longstreth returned, now appreciably calmer. Duane could not but decide that he felt relieved at the evident rejection of Lawson's proposal. "Don't fuss about it, Floyd," he said. "You see I can't help. We're pretty wild out here, but I can't rope my daughter or give her to you as I would an unruly steer." "Longstreth, I can make her marry me," declared Lawson thickly. "How?" "You know the hold I got on you, the deal that made you boss of this rustler gang?" "It isn't likely I'd forget," replied Longstreth grimly. "I can go to Ray, tell her that, make her believe I'd tell it, broadcast, tell this ranger unless she'd marry me." Lawson spoke breathlessly. With haggard face and shadowed eyes, he had no shame. He was simply in the grip of passion. Longstreth gazed with dark, controlled fury at this relative. In that look, Duane saw a strong and scrupulous man, fallen into evil ways, but still a man. It betrayed Lawson to be the wild and passionate weakling. Duane seemed to see also how during all these years of association this strong man had upheld the weak one. But that time had gone forever, both intent on Longstreth's part and the possibility. Lawson, like the great majority of evil and unrestrained men on the border, had reached a point where influence was futile. Reason had degenerated. He saw only himself. But Floyd raised the one person on earth who must never know him a rustler, a thief, and red-handed ruler of the worst gang on the border, replied Longstreth impressively. Floyd bowed his head at that, and if the significance had just occurred to him, but he was not long at a loss. "She's going to find out sooner or later. I tell you, she knows now there's something wrong out here. She's got eyes, Mark. What can I say? Ray has changed, I know, but she hasn't any idea that her daddy's a boss rustler. Ray's concerned about what she calls my duty as mayor. Also, I think she's not satisfied with my explanations in regard to certain property." Lawson's halted in his restless walk and leaned against the stone mantelpiece. He had his hands in his pockets. He squared himself as if this was his last stand. He looked desperate, but on the moment showed an absence of usual nervous excitement. "Longstreth, that may well be true," he said. "No doubt all you say is true, but it doesn't help me. I want the girl, and if I don't get her, I reckon we'll all go to hell." He might have meant anything, probably meant the worst, but he certainly had something more in mind. Longstreth gave a slight start and barely perceptible, like the switch of an awakening tiger. He sat there, head down, stroking his mustache. Almost Dwayne saw his thought. He had long experience in reading men under stress of such emotion. He had no means to vindicate his judgment, but his conviction was that Longstreth, right then and there, decided that the thing to do was kill Lawson. For Dwayne's part, he wondered that Longstreth had not come to such a conclusion before. Not improbably, the advent of his daughter had put Longstreth in conflict with himself. Suddenly, he threw off the somber cast of countenance and began to talk. He talked swiftly, persuasively, yet Dwayne imagined he was talking to smooth Lawson's passion for the moment. Lawson no more caught the fateful significance of line crossed, a limit reached, a decree that decided than if he had not been present. He was obsessed with himself. How, Dwayne wondered, had a man of his mind ever lived so long and gone so far among the exacting conditions of the Southwest? Answer was, perhaps, that Longstreth had guided him, upheld him, protected him. The coming of Ray Longstreth had been entering a wedge of dissension. You're too impatient, concluded Longstreth. You'll ruin any chance of happiness if you rush Ray. She might be one. If you told her who I am, she'd hate you forever. She might marry you to save me, but she'd hate you. That isn't the way. Wait. Play for time. Be different with her. Cut out your drinking. She despises that. Let's plan to sell out here, stock, ranch, property, and leave the country. Then you'd have a show with her. I told you we've got to stick, growled Lawson. The gang won't stand for our going. It can't be done unless you want to sacrifice everything. You mean double-cross the men? Go without their knowing? Leave them here to face whatever comes? I mean just that. I'm bad enough, but not that bad enough, returned Longstreth. If I can't get the gang to let me off, I'll stay and face the music. All the same, Lawson, did it ever strike you that most of the deals the last few years have been yours? Yes. If I hadn't rung them in, there wouldn't have been any. You've had cold feet, and especially since this ranger's been here. We'll call it cold feet if you like. I call it sense. We reached our limit long ago and began by rustling a few cattle at a time, and rustling was laughed at, but as our greed did, so did our boldness. And then came the gang, the regular trips, the one thing and another, and before I knew it, we had shady deals, hold-ups, murders, all of them on our record. Then we had to go on. Too late to turn back now. I reckon we've all said that. None of the gang wants to quit. They all think, and I think, we can't be touched. We may be blamed, but nothing can be proved. We're too strong. There's where you're dead wrong, rejoined Longstreth emphatically. I imagined that once, not long ago, I was bull-headed. Who would ever connect Granger Longstreth with a rustler gang? I changed my mind. I've begun to think, and I've reasoned things out. We're crooked, and we can't last. It's the nature of life, and even here, for conditions to grow better. The wise deal for us would be divide equally and leave the country for all of us. But you and I have all the stock, all to gain, protested Lawson. I'll split mine. I won't. That settles that, added Lawson insistently. Longstreth spread wide his hands as if it was useless to try to convince this man. Talking had not increased his calmness, and now he showed more than impatience. A dull glint gleamed deep in his eyes. Your stock and property will last a long time. Do you lots of good when this ranger is... bah, hoarsely croaked Lawson. The ranger's name was a match applied to powder. Haven't I told you he'd be dead soon? Any time, same as Laramie is. Yes, you mentioned the supposition, replied Longstreth sarcastically. I inquired, too, just how that very desired event was to be brought about. Well, the gang's going to lay him out. Ugh, retorted Longstreth in turn. He laughed contemptuously. Floyd, don't be a fool. You've been on the border for 10 years. You packed a gun and you've used it. You've been with rustlers when they killed their men. You've been present at many fights, but you never in all that time saw a man like this Ranger. You haven't got sense enough to see him right if you had the chance altogether. Neither of you, any of you. Only way to get rid of him is for the gang to draw on him all at once. Then he's going to drop some of them. Longstreth, you say that like a man who wouldn't care much if he did drop some of them, declared Lawson. Now he's sarcastic. Tell the truth, I wouldn't, returned the other bluntly. I'm pretty sick of this mess. Lawson cursed in amazement. His emotions were all out of proportion to his intelligence. He was not at all quick-witted. Duane had never seen a vainer, more arrogant man. Longstreth, I don't like your talk, he said. If you don't like the way I talk, you know what you can do, replied Longstreth quickly. He stood up, then cool and quiet, with a flash of eyes and set of lips that told Duane he's dangerous. Well, after all, that's neither here nor there, went on Lawson unconsciously, cowed by the other. Thing is, do I get the girl? Not by any means, except by her consent. You'll not make her marry me? No, replied Longstreth, his voice still cold and low-pitched. All right, then, I'll make her. Evidently, Longstreth understood the man before him so well that he wasted no more words. Duane knew what Lawson never dreamed of, and that was that Longstreth had a gun somewhere within reach and meant to use it. Then heavy footsteps sounded outside, tamping upon the porch. Duane might have been mistaken, but he believed those footsteps saved Lawson's life. There they are, said Lawson. He opened the door. 5 masked men entered. They all wore coats hiding any weapons, and a big man with burly shoulders shook hands with Longstreth, and the others stood back. The atmosphere of that room had changed. Lawson might have been nonentity for all he counted. Longstreth was another man, a stranger to Duane. If he entertained hope of freeing himself from this band, of getting away to safer country, abandoned it at the very sight of these men. There was power here, and he was bound. The big man spoke in low, hoarse whispers, and at this all the others gathered around him close to the table. There were evidently some signs of membership, not plain to Duane. Then all the heads were bent over the table. Low voices spoke, queried, answered, argued. But straining his ears, Duane caught a word here and there. They were planning, and they were brief. Duane gathered that they were to have a rendezvous near Ord. Then the big man, who evidently was the leader of the present convention, got up to depart. He went as swiftly as he'd come, and he was followed by his other comrades. Longstreth prepared for a quiet smoke. Lawson seemed uncommunicative and unsociable. He smoked fiercely and drank continually. All at once he straightened up as if listening. "What's that?" he called suddenly. Duane's strained ears were pervaded by a slight rustling sound. "Must be a rat," replied Longstreth. The rustle became a rattle. "Sounds like a rattlesnake to me," said Lawson. Longstreth got up from the table and peered round the room. Just at that instant, Duane felt an almost inappreciable movement of the adobe wall which supported him. He could scarcely credit his senses, but that rattle inside Longstreth's room was mingling with the little dull thuds of falling dirt. The adobe wall, merely dried mud, was crumbling. Duane distinctly felt a tremor pass through it. Then the blood gushed back to his heart. "What in the hell?" exclaimed Longstreth. "I smell dust," said Lawson sharply. That was a signal for Duane to drop from his perch, yet despite the care he made noise. "Did you hear a step?" queried Longstreth. No one answered, but a heavy piece of the adobe wall fell with a thud. Duane heard it crack and felt it shake. "There's somebody between the walls," thundered Longstreth. Then a section of wall fell inward with a crash. Duane began to squeeze his body through the narrow passage toward the patio. "Hear him," yelled Lawson. "This side." "No, he's going that way," yelled Longstreth. Tramp of heavy boots lent Duane the strength of desperation. He was not shirking a fight, but to be cornered like a trapped coyote was another matter. He almost tore his clothes off in that passage. The dust nearly stifled him. When he burst into the patio, it was not a single instant too soon. but one deep gasp of breath revived him and he was up, gun in hand, running for the outlet into the court. Thumping footsteps turned him back. Well, there was a chance to get away. He did not want to fight. He thought he heard someone running into the patio from the other end. He stole along and coming to the door without any idea where it might lead. He softly pushed it open a little ways and slipped in.